They called him a
That's him
cursed
right there.
old man,
The one I warned
and
you
the whole
about.
town avoided him
Doesn't
like
look like
something
much.
they should never
Trust
get
me,
close to.
He's dangerous.
A Navy SEAL and his dog arrived to reopen a dangerous road, but they quickly realized something wasn't right. Right in front of that old house, there was a bus stop that had never been officially recognized, yet had existed for years. Then, one day, an accident happened, and every rumor people believed began to fall apart. Sometimes the truth isn't in what people say, but in the quiet things no one chooses to see. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 followers so we can continue bringing meaningful stories. Now, let's step into the story. The bus groaned like an old animal climbing into weather it did not trust. Rowan Vale sat 2 rows from the back, one broad shoulder against the cold window, watching the northern light spill over the world in pale bands of silver and blue. Minnesota, in late winter, had a way of looking both merciful and unforgiving at once. The sky was bright. The snowbanks along the roadside flashed under the sun, and the black ribs of pine forest stood beyond them in patient silence. Beauty lived here, but it lived with its boots on. At Rowan's feet lay Coda, a German shepherd of 5, large-boned and lean, with a sable coat that shifted from cream to gray to black, depending on the light. The dog's ears lifted at every change in engine pitch, then settled again when Rowan's boot brushed lightly against his side. But Coda wore a black working harness with a dark red trim, practical and worn enough to look honest. There was intelligence in his amber-brown eyes, but more than that, there was judgment. Coda did not like everyone. He tolerated many, respected a few, and trusted almost no one before Rowan did. Rowan trusted Coda's instincts more than he trusted most men's words. He was 35, 6 feet tall, clean-shaven, with a square jaw and high cheekbones that gave his face the severe structure of old military photographs. His dark brown hair was clipped short in a practical military style, though slightly longer than regulation would have allowed in his SEAL years. Time and northern wind had browned his otherwise fair skin into something rougher, harder earned. His gray-blue eyes did not harden when he looked at people. That was the thing some noticed first. He did not stare like a man hunting weakness. He looked the way men looked after they had seen enough of pain to stop treating it like entertainment. But he wore the same clothes he wore on nearly every field assignment. An old olive-gray tactical combat shirt, softened by years of use, the cuffs and shoulders faintly frayed, a dark red thermal layer visible at the throat. His combat pants were earth brown with hints of moss green, the knees worn pale, the cargo pockets loosened by years of actual work. Old military work boots, scarred but dependable, grounded him to the bus floor. A weathered military watch sat on his wrist like habit made physical. Across the aisle sat a woman with a sleeping toddler in a puffy blue coat. Near the front, 2 high school boys whispered over something on a phone, laughing too loudly whenever the signal returned. A gaunt old man in a plaid cap stared out the windshield, as if he personally distrusted the road. The driver, a heavy-set man with a graying beard and a face pinkened by dry winter air, was kept both hands tight on the wheel. Rowan didn't mind buses. Men assumed a former Navy SEAL would hate anything that surrendered control to strangers. But that was too simple. In his old life, he had spent enough time in aircraft, boats, armored vehicles, and places far less forgiving than a rural bus route. What bothered him wasn't surrendering control. It was false calm. It was when people pretended a bad road was safe because saying otherwise would slow down the day. This route was exactly the kind of problem he had been hired to study. He no longer wore a uniform, but the habits remained. After leaving the Navy, Rowan had moved into field operations and terrain safety consulting for remote infrastructure work. It suited him better than office walls ever could. He assessed winter access roads, emergency response viability, hidden drainage problems, unstable shoulders, blind curves. He translated land into risk. And the road leading toward Bright Hollow was one of the latest assignments, part of a regional access project meant to improve year-round passage for buses, supply vehicles, and ambulances. A worthy goal on paper. On paper, roads were lines. In real life, they were promises that could break under ice. The bus crested a rise, and sunlight burst full across the windshield. For a moment, everything beyond the glass looked almost wholly white meadows glittering, pine shadows lying long and blue, the frozen edge of a pond shining like hammered tin. Then the bus lurched. Not violently, not enough to send anyone flying, but enough. The woman clutched her child. One of the boys muttered, "Whoa!" The driver cursed under his breath and corrected left, then right. Rowan felt the shift through the floor before he fully saw it. The right side had dropped just enough to say the front tire had slipped off the packed lane and onto unstable shoulder. Coda rose at once. "It's okay," Rowan murmured, though he was already standing. Matul, the driver, eased to a stop, with the careful shame of a man trying not to make a bad thing worse. Outside, the road looked mostly clear, but Rowan knew better than to trust color. Dark patches could be shallow melt, or they could be black ice holding a grudge. "I need everyone to stay seated a minute," the driver called, trying for authority and landing somewhere near apology. Rowan was already near the front. "You got a shovel? Traction sand? Anything?" The driver gave him a quick once-over, clocking the posture before the clothing. "Some sand, little shovel, not much else. I'll take a look." Outside, the cold struck clean and immediate, filling Rowan's lungs with a metallic sharpness that reminded him of mountain mornings from another life. The bus leaned slightly toward the ditch, right wheel pressed into a deceptive crust of snow and softened gravel underneath. Harmless enough if handled right, stupidly dangerous if rushed. He crouched, gloved fingers brushing the edge of frozen slush, and then stood and scanned the shoulder, the drainage dip, the slope of the land. He heard the bus door hiss again behind him. "Sir, you shouldn't," the driver started, but Rowan was already moving toward the supply compartment. Then a voice came from the roadside. "Don't spin it." It was not loud. It did not need to be. Rowan turned. The old man stood beyond the ditch line near a weathered mailbox and a narrow path beaten through the snow toward a house set back from the road. He looked to be in his 70s, maybe older, but built the way some rural men were built when age had taken flesh and left structure behind. He was lean, not fragile wiry in the shoulders, with a back still mostly straight, and hands that looked like they had shaped metal, wood, and stubborn machinery for decades. His face was lined deeply, not softly. The kind of lines weather made in partnership with silence. His hair was silver gray, thin on top but not gone, tucked beneath no hat despite the cold. A rough work jacket the color of old ash and faded olive hung over a dark flannel shirt. The cuffs were worn. There were faint oil stains near one pocket. His boots were old and properly broken in. His eyes, from this distance, looked pale and guarded. "The shoulder's hollow there," he said. "You spin it, it sinks deeper." The driver, halfway out the door, bristled with the automatic defensiveness of a man embarrassed in front of passengers. "I know how to drive my route." The old man did not argue. "Then you know I'm right." Something in Rowan almost smiled. The man walked toward them carrying a short board, a length of chain, and a small tool bag. No dramatics, no performance, just equipment. Coda, standing beside Rowan, did something unexpected. He went still, ears forward, tail level, not alarmed, not friendly, simply attentive. Then, after a long second, the dog relaxed. That alone made Rowan pay closer attention. The old man set down the board near the tire. Angle it left when it climbs. Slow, not proud. Rowan glanced at the drainage line again and saw what the man had seen immediately. Beneath the snow crust, runoff had eaten a small hollow under the shoulder. One burst of torque would crack it open. "You live here?" Rowan asked. The old man ignored the question and looked at Rowan's hands instead. "You ever use a jack on ice? Enough. Then don't waste time talking." Together, with the driver reluctantly joining in, they worked the problem. Rowan cleared packed slush from the wheel path. The old man wedged the board where the tire would bite first and looped the chain for stability. When Rowan reached under the bus frame to check clearance, a jagged edge scraped across his knuckles. He pulled back with a hiss. Blood welled bright against the cold, and the old man reached into his pocket and tossed him a folded rag and a pair of old leather gloves. "Put those on before your hands go stupid," he said. It was such a small thing that Rowan almost missed the force of it. Not concern dressed up as kindness, not friendliness, just care, given in the plainest possible language. They got the bus back onto solid road in less than 10 minutes. Inside, the passengers exhaled together in that embarrassed, communal way people did when fear had briefly made them strangers. The woman with the toddler mouthed a thank you through the glass. One of the teenage boys lifted a hand at Rowan, half sheepish now. The driver rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the old man, as if trying to decide whether gratitude felt too much like surrender. Rowan stripped off the borrowed gloves and stepped toward the roadside. "Appreciate the help," he said. The old man took the gloves back, but not the thanks. "Road lies when it shines like that." His voice was rough, but not cruel, just unused. Then Coda did something stranger. The shepherd crossed the shallow edge of the ditch and stopped in front of the old man. Not close enough to crowd him, just close enough to choose him. He lifted his nose once, studying the scent of oil, cold air, old wood smoke, and something tired beneath it. Then he sat. Rowan frowned. Coda did not sit for many people. The old man looked down at the dog, and for the first time something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not nearly that generous, but the loosening of a door bolt inside an old house. "Huh," he said softly. "Smart one." That should have been the end of it, but as Rowan turned to board, his gaze slid past the old man to the house beyond. Old, broad-shouldered, and carefully kept despite its years. The paint had dulled, the porch posts leaned just slightly, and the roofline showed the fatigue of many winters, yet nothing about it felt abandoned. Even from the road, it carried the unmistakable shape of discipline. A shoveled path, stacked wood under cover. A gate repaired, but not replaced, and near the roadside, half buried in snow, something that looked like a bench under a small angled windbreak, not decorative, useful. A place someone had made for waiting. "Sir," the driver called. "We need to move." Rowan climbed back on. Coda followed, but not before looking once more over his shoulder. As the bus pulled away, Rowan took his seat and watched through the glass while the old man gathered his board and chain. No wave. No last look. He simply turned and walked toward the old house with the measured gait of someone who had long ago stopped expecting company to mean comfort. The woman across the aisle settled her child again. The boys resumed whispering. The driver muttered something about back roads and county neglect, but Rowan barely heard any of it. His cut knuckles stung under the rag. In his lap lay the faint smell of old leather and machine oil left by the borrowed gloves. Coda rested his chin on Rowan's boot and let out one slow breath, as if some private test had been passed. Rowan looked back until the house disappeared behind a stand of pine. He told himself it was just a useful encounter on a bad shoulder, a competent local man helping a stranded bus. Nothing mystical, nothing fated. He had spent too much of his life around men who tried to dress coincidence in myth because they couldn't bear randomness. And yet the image stayed with him. The bench by the road, the quiet authority, the dog choosing trust without hesitation. Outside, Bright Hollow waited farther ahead, bright under the winter sun and cold enough to punish carelessness. Rowan had come to study a road, but somewhere behind him, near a weathered mailbox and an old house keeping its own counsel, something in the day had shifted its weight. He could feel it, not like danger, more like memory arriving before it had earned the right to exist. By the time Rowan Vale stepped off the bus in Bright Hollow, the light had shifted. Morning had lifted into something clearer, sharper. The kind of northern brightness that made every edge visible and every shadow honest. Snow along the roadside no longer shimmered. It revealed texture now. Ruts. Footprints. Places where boots had passed and passed again. Places where people lived. Coda stepped down beside him, landing lightly despite his size, scanning the space in a slow arc. The dog's posture changed almost immediately, not tense, not relaxed, but alert in a way that suggested this place had layers. Rowan felt it too. Bright Hollow was not a picturesque village in the way postcards liked to lie. It was practical. Buildings sat where they needed to, not where they looked best. A gas pump stood near a weathered wooden structure that doubled as a supply store. A line of pickup trucks rested along the packed snow shoulder, each one bearing scars of winters survived rather than polished away. And yet there was light everywhere. Not warmth, but light. Rowan Vale? The voice came from behind him, clear, controlled, carrying the kind of tone that did not need to raise itself to be heard. He turned. Mara Keene stood near a parked utility truck, dusted in road salt and thin ice. She was in her late 30s, maybe just touching 40, with a frame built for function rather than display, compact, steady, and efficient. Her hair, a muted brown with strands of lighter weathering, was pulled into a low tie at the nape of her neck, tucked beneath the collar of a slate blue cold-weather jacket. Her skin bore the faint dryness of someone who spent more time outside than most professionals in her field, and her eyes clear, assessing mist. Very little. She held a tablet in one hand, gloved fingers resting against its edge, as if it were less a device and more an extension of her memory. "You're earlier than expected," she said. "Road was honest," Rowan replied. A corner of her mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but acknowledgement. "That's rare," she said. "Come on. We've got half a day before light starts dropping." Coda approached her without hesitation, stopping just short of her boots. He didn't sit this time. He simply stood and looked up. Mara glanced down at him. "He always evaluate people like that?" "Only when it matters." She considered that for half a second, then nodded once. "Good. We'll get along." They moved together toward the truck. The survey route cut through the outer stretch of the village before climbing toward the more isolated sections. Mara drove. Rowan watched. She handled the wheel the way some people handled tools they respected. Not casually, not fearfully, but with quiet familiarity. No wasted motion. No overcorrection. She drove as if she understood the road's habits, rather than fought them. "County wants year-round access," she said, eyes still forward. "Emergency response times in winter are unacceptable. School transport, too. This route's been patched for years. Never fixed." Rowan nodded. "Surface lies," he said. "Drainage worse." "Exactly." She tapped the dashboard lightly with her knuckles. "We're not rebuilding the world, just making it survivable." They drove past clusters of houses, some tight together, some spaced wide apart like thoughts that refused to connect. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin vertical lines. A dog barked somewhere unseen. Wind moved through the trees with a steady, low breath. At a bend near a small clearing, Mara slowed. "This stretch," she said. "Problem area." Rowan stepped out, boots crunching over layered ice and gravel. He crouched, studied the grade, the angle of runoff, the way meltwater had cut shallow lines that would refreeze overnight into invisible traps. Coda moved ahead of him, nose low, then paused. Not at the road, at the side. Rowan followed the dog's line of sight and felt something shift. Not recognition. Not yet. Just a pull. He straightened, but said nothing. They reached the center of Bright Hollow around midday. The center was less a formal designation and more an agreement: 3 buildings, a fuel station, and a wooden sign that had once been painted bright, but now carried its name in faded confidence. Mara parked near the general store. 10 minutes, she said. Then we continue North Line. Rowan nodded. Inside, the store smelled of coffee, dry wood, and something faintly sweet old sugar, maybe, or baked goods kept too close to the heat. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s, broad-shouldered and steady, with short hair that had long since surrendered its original color to a soft gray. Her face was open in structure, but cautious in expression, like someone who had learned not to give warmth away too quickly. She wore a thick cardigan over a simple shirt, sleeves pushed back to reveal wrists that had worked most of their life. "Passing through?" she asked. "Working," Mara answered, already moving toward a shelf. The woman's eyes shifted to Rowan, then to Coda. "Big dog," she said. "Smarter than me," Rowan replied. That earned him a real smile brief, but genuine. "I'm June," she said. "June Mercer." "Rowan." He didn't offer more. She didn't ask. Coda moved quietly along the floorboards, then stopped near a rack of small items: gloves, scarves, basic tools. What he sniffed once, then turned toward the back door. June noticed. "He smells everything," she said. "That one." "Not everything," Rowan replied. "Only what matters." June gave him a longer look this time. "Careful with that kind of thinking," she said. "Town like this, you start believing instincts over people. You end up alone." Rowan didn't respond. Not because he disagreed. Because he understood too well. Outside, near the fuel pump, 2 men leaned against a pickup. One of them stood out immediately. Darren Pike. Mid-40s, thick through the shoulders and neck, built like someone who had spent years lifting more than he should have needed to. His face was weathered in a different way than Silas's, less carved by time, more hardened by something held onto. His hair was cut short, already graying at the temples, and his jaw carried a constant tension, as if he was always one word away from argument. "New road, guys?" Darren asked as Rowan approached. "Part of it," Rowan said, and Darren nodded once, then spat to the side. "About time," he muttered. "Road's been bad for years." "Not wrong," Rowan replied. Darren's eyes narrowed slightly. "Just don't make it worse trying to make it better." There it was. Not hostility, exactly. But not trust, either. Coda, who had been standing beside Rowan, suddenly moved. Not toward Darren, not toward Mara, but past them, straight toward the edge of the road where the packed snow gave way to a narrow path leading outward. He stopped at the mouth of it, then sat. Still. Watching. Not restless, not curious. Waiting. Rowan felt it immediately, that same quiet tension from earlier on the road. Not danger, not fear. Recognition without memory. Darren frowned. "Dog sees something?" Rowan didn't answer right away. because he wasn't looking at the path. He was looking at Coda. And the way the dog did not move, as if whatever lay beyond that path had already chosen them first. "Hey," June's voice called from the store doorway. "Don't let him wander too far. Snow looks solid until it isn't." Rowan stepped forward, resting a hand briefly on Coda's harness. "Not wandering," he said quietly. The dog stood, but only after Rowan touched him. They walked back toward Mara. "What was that?" she asked. "Nothing," Rowan said, but the word didn't settle right. As the afternoon stretched on, Rowan found himself noticing something else. It wasn't just what people said. It was how they said it. The name came up more than once, not loudly, not directly, but always there. Silas. "Don't go near that place. Man keeps to himself too much. Always been off." Each sentence carried a different tone, dismissive, wary, irritated, but none of them carried certainty. That bothered Rowan more than open hatred would have, because uncertainty dressed as judgment was harder to break. Mara noticed it too. "Local tension," she said as they walked another stretch of road. Every town has one." "One what?" "One person everyone agrees not to understand." Rowan glanced at her. "You believe that?" "I believe it happens," she said. "Whether it's deserved is another thing." Coda walked slightly ahead now, nose low again, then lifting occasionally as if catching something on the air. Rowan followed. Not the road. The pattern. Late afternoon light began its slow descent, turning the snowfields into long mirrors of pale gold. They reached a bend. A familiar bend. Rowan stopped. There it was again. The path. The angle. The space beside the road that felt different, not safer, not cleaner, just intentional. He didn't say anything, but Coda did not hesitate this time. He moved forward, straight down the edge, toward the place Rowan had only seen in passing before. Mara paused behind him. "You know something?" she asked. Rowan shook his head slowly. "No," he said. Then, after a beat, "Not yet." But his eyes stayed fixed ahead. And something in his chest, something quiet, something patient began to lean toward that place, as if it had been waiting for him long before he arrived. The road bent slowly, as if it had learned over time not to rush through this part of the land. Rowan Vale walked ahead of Mara now, his boots pressing into the packed snow with a steady rhythm. Coda moved just in front of him, not pulling, not hesitating, simply choosing a direction with quiet certainty. The air carried a different weight here. Not heavier, just older. Mara followed a few steps behind, tablet tucked under her arm, her eyes shifting between the ground and the surrounding terrain. She had learned quickly that Rowan didn't move without reason. When he slowed, she paid attention. When he stopped, she studied the environment before asking questions. "Grade flattens here," she said, more to herself than to him. "Good for a stop." Rowan didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed ahead, and the house came into view the way certain truths did, gradually, then all at once. It stood slightly back from the road, framed by a line of trees that had been trimmed, not for beauty, but for function. Windbreak. Snow control. The structure itself was old, but not abandoned. Wide-shouldered, built from timber that had seen decades, maybe more. The paint had faded into a soft, weathered gray, and the roofline sagged just enough to show age, not failure. Everything about it said one thing: maintained. Not restored, not renovated. Maintained. Coda slowed as they approached, then lowered his head slightly, sniffing the air with a quiet focus. His tail didn't wag. It didn't stiffen either. It held a neutral line, the position he took when he was thinking. Rowan felt it again. That same quiet pull from the day before, but stronger now. Closer. "You've been here before," Mara said. It wasn't a question. Rowan exhaled lightly. "Passed by," he said. "Didn't stop." Mara nodded once, filing that away. "Let's not trespass," she added. "We observe first." Rowan almost agreed. Almost. The ground between the road and the house told a story before the building ever did. The snow had been cleared in a narrow, deliberate path. Not wide enough for show, just enough for use. Footprints overlapped in layers, some older, some fresh. The edges of the path were reinforced with scattered gravel and wood chips, preventing the melt and freeze cycle from turning it into a trap. To the right, near the road, stood the bench Rowan had glimpsed before. Up close, it revealed more. Rough-cut lumber, sanded only where hands would touch. The backrest angled slightly, not by accident, but by someone who understood how the human spine tired in cold weather. A low wooden panel had been built behind it, blocking the wind from the north side. Not tall, just enough. There was a metal hook fixed into one post. A small detail, but intentional. Mara crouched near the base. "Reinforced footing," she murmured. He dug into the frost line. "Whoever built this knows what winter does to loose structures." Rowan didn't need confirmation. He already knew. Coda stepped forward, circling once around the bench, then stopping near the windbreak panel. He pressed his nose briefly against the wood, inhaled, then pulled back, and sat. Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. He had seen Coda behave like this before. Only twice. Both times had ended with something Rowan didn't forget. The sound of a door opening cut through the stillness. Rowan turned. Silas Wren stood in the doorway of the house. Up close, the man looked older than he had from the road, but also sharper. His frame was lean, almost spare, but there was nothing fragile about him. The lines on his face were deep, etched by years of weather, and something quieter years of choosing not to speak when speaking would have cost too much. His eyes moved first to Rowan, then to Mara, then to Coda. They lingered there, for a fraction longer than necessary. "What do you want?" Silas asked. No greeting, no hostility, just a question stripped of decoration. Rowan stepped forward slightly, careful not to close the distance too fast. "Survey work," he said. "We're mapping the route." Silas glanced at the road. "Route's been there longer than you have." "Not the same route," Mara replied calmly. Her voice was steady, professional, not defensive, not apologetic. Silas studied her now. She held his gaze without challenge. He nodded once. "Then map it from there," he said, gesturing loosely toward the road. "Not from my yard." Clear, direct, boundary set. Rowan respected that. He would have left it there. He should have. But something in him resisted the simplicity of walking away. "We're not here to take anything," Rowan said. Silas's expression didn't change. "That what they told you to say?" "No." "Then don't say it." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken measurements. Mara stepped in, shifting the tone just enough. "We're assessing safety," she said, "for winter access, school transport, emergency vehicles." Silas's eyes flickered. Not much, but enough. "Kids still come down this road?" he asked. "They try," Mara said. Silas looked back toward the bench, then at the path, then at nothing in particular. "Road don't care who uses it," he said. "Breaks the same way for everyone." Coda stood, without warning. He moved past Rowan, past Mara, straight toward the house. Not fast, not aggressive, just certain. He stopped halfway up the path, then turned not toward Rowan, but toward a spot just beside the porch steps. He stared at the ground, then took one step closer and lowered himself. Carefully, as if lying down on something that wasn't visible. Rowan felt a cold line move through his spine. "What is he doing?" Mara whispered. Rowan didn't answer, because he didn't know. Coda didn't roll, didn't relax. He simply lay there, head lifted, eyes fixed on the empty space in front of the porch. Waiting. For what? Or for who? Silas spoke again. Softer this time. He doesn't do that for nothing. Rowan looked at him. Neither man moved. Neither man explained. The moment passed the way strange moments often did, without resolution, but not without consequence. Coda rose on his own and returned to Rowan's side, brushing briefly against his leg as if to confirm something had been acknowledged. Rowan exhaled slowly. "Sorry," he said. Silas shrugged. "Dog's got better sense than most people." That almost sounded like approval. Almost. Rowan gestured lightly toward the bench. "You built that." Not a question. Silas followed his gaze. "Needed it," he said. "For who?" Silas hesitated. Then, "Anyone who stops long enough." Mara stood, brushing snow from her gloves. "That placement," she said, pointing toward the road. "It's one of the safest approach angles we've seen so far." Silas didn't respond, but he didn't dismiss it either. Rowan stepped closer to the edge of the path, careful not to cross into the space uninvited. "If the route shifts slightly," he said, "this could become a designated stop point." There it was. The line. The future brushing against the present. Silas's face hardened, not in anger, but in something deeper. Refusal. "No," he said, flat, immediate. Rowan didn't push. "Why?" Silas met his eyes. "Because I don't want it. Or because you don't trust it." Silas's jaw tightened. "Same thing." Rowan shook his head slightly. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." That landed, not loudly, but it stayed. A movement near the gate caught Rowan's attention. A small figure stood half-hidden behind the wooden post. A boy. 9, maybe 10. Thin, yet with a narrow face and light brown hair that stuck out unevenly beneath a knitted hat pulled too low. His coat was a size too big, sleeves covering part of his hands. His boots were worn but tied carefully, as if someone had taught him that details mattered. He held a paper bag. Not tightly. Carefully. As if what was inside mattered more than the bag itself. Rowan stepped back slightly, giving space. "You lost?" he asked. The boy shook his head quickly. "No, sir." His voice was quiet, but clear. He glanced at Silas, then at the ground. "I just came to drop something off." Silas didn't move. "Then drop it," he said. The boy didn't step forward. I thought maybe," he trailed off. Rowan crouched slightly, lowering himself to the boy's level. "What's your name?" "Eli," he said. "Eli Mercer." Rowan nodded. "Okay, Eli. You don't have to go in if you don't want to." Eli looked relieved, just a little. "He fixed my bike," Eli said, eyes still on the snow. Didn't charge me." Silas shifted in the doorway. "Thing was falling apart," he muttered. Eli held up the bag. "My grandma made bread," he said. "She said to say thank you." Silas stared at the bag, then at Eli, then away. "Leave it on the bench," he said. Eli nodded quickly and moved forward, placing the bag carefully on the wooden seat as if it were something fragile. Coda watched him the entire time, not judging, not analyzing, just present. Eli glanced at the dog. "He's big," he said. Rowan almost smiled. "He's careful," he replied. Eli nodded, as if that mattered more. Then he stepped back, gave one last look toward Silas. Something between hope and uncertainty, and turned toward the road. He didn't run, but he didn't linger either. Silas remained in the doorway. The bag sat on the bench. The wind moved softly through the trees. Rowan looked at the scene and felt something settle into place. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to know this was not a man people understood, and not a place that would stay quiet for long. He turned back toward Mara. "We've got what we need for today," he said. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," she said. "We do." As they walked back toward the road, Rowan didn't look back immediately, but Coda did. Once. Long enough to remember. The next morning arrived polished and hard, all clean, light, and disciplined cold. Bright Hollow looked gentler from a distance than it felt underfoot. Snow along the road had a blue shadow in it, and the pine trunks rose black and straight beyond the ditch lines, each one catching the morning sun on only one side. Rowan Vale stood with a paper cup of bad coffee warming his palm, and studied the stretch of road in front of Silas Wren's house, as if the land itself might confess something if he waited long enough. Coda stood beside him, broad chest forward, breath clouding in slow white bursts. The German shepherd's sable coat caught the light in layered colors, cream beneath the neck, ash gray through the shoulders, black along the spine like a dark brushstroke laid with intention. His ears shifted at every passing sound, a truck farther down the village road, a crow in the trees, the dull knock of loose metal somewhere in the wind, but his body remained steady, focused. Mara Keene came up from the truck, carrying rolled field notes beneath one arm, and a level-headed expression she seemed to wake wearing. Even in heavy winter layers, she looked built for work rather than comfort, her posture straight, her stride efficient, her features sharpened by a life spent solving real problems in places where weather did not care about credentials. She stopped beside Rowan and followed his gaze to the road. "You're seeing it too," she said. He nodded. "Approach angle's clean. Better sightline from both directions. Ground holds firmer here than the lower bend." Mara crouched near the shoulder and brushed aside the powdery top layer with her gloved hand. Beneath it, the frozen surface was packed with old gravel and compacted runoff sediment. "Drainage still needs help," she said. "But the grade is better than most of what we've seen." Rowan looked toward the bench near the roadside, the rough windbreak, the path cleared with more discipline than most municipal sidewalks. None of it was decorative. Everything was placed where it needed to be. "Someone's already been solving the problem," he said. Mara straightened. "Without permits and without signage." "Still solved." She gave him a side glance that held the faintest hint of a smile. That is exactly the kind of sentence that gets fieldmen into arguments with county offices. He drank the coffee and grimaced. "Then let the county win on paper." The village had not fully awakened yet, but it was making its sounds. A distant screen door banged shut. An engine coughed into life. Somewhere a radio played low and tinny through a wall, thin enough to leak country music into the morning. Bright Hollow moved slowly in winter, as though each day had to be persuaded to begin. They spent the next hour measuring, marking, and noting what the road did in silence, where meltwater crossed, where tires wore deeper grooves, where shoulder drift would collect after wind. Rowan worked in the calm, methodical rhythm he trusted most, the same one that had kept him alive in harsher places than this. Observe, confirm. Don't assume the ground beneath you wants you standing there. But the longer he worked near Silas's house, the more the scene resisted becoming just another problem set. The bench remained in the edge of his vision. So did the low handrail fixed to one side of the path, the hook under the windbreak, the grit scattered where boots would slip. These were not random acts of tidiness. They were accommodations, made for strangers, repeated, maintained, renewed. Silas had built care into the roadside and then hidden it inside utility. By late morning, word had traveled. It always did in small places. When Rowan and Mara returned toward the center of Bright Hollow to compare route notes against county maps, they found Darren Pike standing outside the fuel station with his thumbs hooked in the pockets of his work jacket. He looked like he had been born in cold weather and had been arguing with it ever since. Thick-bodied, hard in the jaw, with short, dark blonde hair already going pale at the temples, Darren carried himself like a man whose grief had settled into muscle long ago and never properly left. Even at rest, he seemed braced for impact. "You planning to stop buses out there?" he asked without preamble. Mara answered first. "We're evaluating options." "That a yes or a no?" "That's an evaluation." Darren's eyes shifted to Rowan. "People keep talking. Figured I'd ask before somebody makes a bad call permanent." Rowan let the pause sit. "It's one of the safer points we've seen," he said. "Doesn't mean it's final." Darren laughed once, without humor. "Safer for who?" "For school pickups, older residents, winter access." Darren looked past them toward the road out of town, and something old and private moved across his face before he buried it again. "That stretch has enough history," he said. "Last thing it needs is more people stopping there." Mara folded her arms. "History doesn't change grade, visibility, or shoulder stability." "No," Darren said. "But it changes where folks ought to stand." There it was again, that same village habit of speaking around Silas instead of through him, as if directness might force honesty on everyone involved. June Mercer stepped out of her general store just then, carrying a crate of canned goods against her hip. In daylight, she looked exactly like the kind of woman a place like this might quietly revolve around, broad through the shoulders, practical in movement, her face lined by responsibility rather than vanity. Her gray hair was pinned back without ceremony, and her eyes had the look of someone who had watched generations grow, leave, return, and fail in familiar ways. "Darren," she said, not sharply but with enough weight to interrupt him, "if you're going to pick a fight before noon, at least pick one with a better audience." He didn't answer her, just muttered something and moved off toward his truck. June watched him go, then turned to Rowan and Mara. "He's not wrong about history," she said quietly. "Just wrong about what to do with it." Rowan studied her face. "You say that like you've had practice." June adjusted the crate in her arms. "This town's had practice." She carried the goods inside before either of them could ask more. That afternoon, Rowan returned alone to the road by Silas's house. Not because he had official reason to. Mara had the maps. The measurements could wait. But some things in him had stopped accepting coincidence as a sufficient explanation. He told himself he was there to reassess runoff points and shoulder width in changing light. It sounded better than admitting curiosity had become responsibility. Coda trotted beside him, nails clicking once on frozen gravel before the snow muffled his steps. The dog's harness straps creaked softly with each movement. Silas was outside, kneeling beside the handrail with a wrench in one hand and a coffee can full of bolts by his knee. He wore the same worn, ash-colored work jacket, its elbows whitened by years of friction, over a dark flannel shirt. In daylight, the age in him looked less like weakness and more like weathered endurance. His hands, bare despite the cold, were veined and scarred and exact. He did not look up immediately. "You survey every ditch twice," he said. "Or you just don't know when to leave a man's yard alone." Rowan stopped at the path's edge. Didn't cross into it. Silas tightened one bolt, tested the rail with his weight, then rose with a stiffness that belonged more to old injuries than old age. You got a reason for standing there? Yes. That seemed to interest him slightly. Rowan nodded toward the path and the rail. You built all this for people waiting on the road. Silas wiped the wrench on a rag and shrugged. Built it because winter's hard on joints. Your joints? Everybody's. He said it like a man annoyed the answer had needed saying. A draft of wind moved across the road and brought with it the smell of snow, pine resin, and old machine oil from the open garage beside the house. Rowan glanced that way. Inside he could see shelves of carefully sorted hardware, coiled rope, a red gas can, 2 folded blankets, and on a side table what looked like a dented metal thermos beside a stack of paper cups. For people waiting, Rowan thought. For people passing through. For anyone but himself. Silas noticed where he was looking and stepped half a pace to close the angle. Not aggressive. Protective. You need something? Rowan met his eyes. If this turns into an official stop, the traffic will change. More weight on the shoulder. More splash from melt. More wear on the path and front grade. Silas said nothing. There are a few things that could be reinforced now, Rowan continued. Drain channel, edge retaining, maybe porch steps before freeze-thaw gets worse. No. The refusal came so fast it nearly arrived before the offer ended. It's not charity. Silas's mouth hardened. That what you tell people when you want them to swallow it easier? Rowan felt the old military instinct rise in him, the one that wanted to push back hard against contempt and force the truth of his intent into the open. He let it pass. This road is going to affect your property whether you welcome it or not, he said. I'm talking about reducing damage. Silas looked past him toward the road. For a moment his expression changed, not softening exactly, but tightening around something older than irritation. I know what roads do, he said. Rowan believed him, and that was the problem. A small school mitten lay half buried near the bench, caught in the crusted snow as if winter had been trying to keep it. Rowan might not have noticed it at all, if Coda hadn't moved first. The German Shepherd broke from Rowan's side, nosed through the drift, and gently pulled the mitten free. Instead of bringing it back, he carried it to Silas and set it at the old man's boots. Silas stared down at the child-sized mitten for a long second. His face did not soften. His shoulders did not sag. Yet something happened in his eyes, something brief and piercing, like pain passing under ice. Then he bent, picked up the mitten with more care than the object required, and brushed the snow from it with his thumb. Kid from the Larson place lost one last week, he said, almost to himself. He turned toward the garage, opened the side door, and hung the mitten beside 3 others on a line near the thermos and paper cups. Not lost property. Prepared mercy. A place for the things children forgot. Rowan felt the truth of the man settle heavier inside him than any rumor ever could. When Silas came back out, his expression had already closed again. Dog's got a habit of embarrassing people, he muttered. He's selective. So am I. A sound at the gate made them both turn. Eli Mercer stood there, wind-reddened and cautious, clutching the strap of a patched backpack. In the clearer light, Rowan could see him better than before. All elbows and sincerity, with a narrow face, pale winter skin, and earnest brown eyes that never seemed fully certain they were welcome anywhere important. His knit cap sat crooked over hair the color of dry wheat. He had the posture of a child who had learned to make himself small in adult spaces. He looked from Rowan to Silas, then down at his boots. Bus didn't come yet, he said, as if explaining why he was there. Silas grunted. You're early. Grandma says early's better than cold and late. That woman says a lot. Eli gave the faintest smile, then shifted his backpack from one shoulder to the other. Silas eyed the strap. Still holding? Yes, sir. Bring it here. Eli hesitated only a second before stepping closer. Silas took the bag, turned it in his hands, examined the stitching where the strap had begun to tear, then jerked his chin toward the bench. Sit. Eli sat at once. From his jacket pocket, Silas pulled a heavy needle already threaded with dark cord. Rowan watched in silence as the old man reinforced the torn strap with neat, fast stitches, the kind that came from long habit rather than performance. Coda lowered himself near Eli's boots, calm and watchful. After a moment, the boy's gloved hand drifted down to rest lightly on the shepherd's neck. Coda allowed it. Rowan noticed the trust moving in both directions. When Silas finished, he handed the bag back. Don't yank it by one side. I won't. You will. Just less. Eli smiled fully this time. The school bus did not appear, but the light continued to shift, and the road held its long winter silence. Rowan looked at the bench, the handrail, the path, the mitten line in the garage, the boy on the seat, the old man pretending not to care whether children arrived warm. There were people in war zones who hid food for strangers more openly than Silas Wren hid kindness. Maybe concealment had become the only safe way he knew to keep doing good. Rowan glanced at the road again, measuring more than slope now. He was beginning to understand why this place mattered, not because the village said it did, because the village had failed to notice it already had. When Eli finally stood, and he adjusted the repaired backpack with careful pride. Thank you, Mr. Wren. Silas waved the gratitude away with visible discomfort. Go on, wind's turning. Eli trotted back toward the road's edge, pausing only once to scratch Coda behind the ear before hurrying off. Silas watched until the boy had gone far enough to be safe. Only then did he pick up his wrench again. Rowan took that as the closest thing he would get to permission for the day. He stepped back from the path. I'll leave it. Good. But I'm not wrong. Silas gave a dry, humorless breath that almost resembled a laugh. That why you came back? To be right? Rowan thought about the bench, the cups, the mitten line, the handrail, the path cut through the snow. No, he said. Silas studied him, then looked away first. That, Rowan knew, was not surrender, but it was not dismissal either. As he and Coda turned back toward the road, the late sun struck the front of the house and laid a band of gold across the old boards. For one brief moment, the place looked less like an isolated house at the edge of a problem road and more like what it truly was. A waiting place built by a man who did not trust people enough to ask them to need him, yet kept preparing for them anyway. Rowan walked on without looking back. He did not need to. He had seen enough. The wind came first. Not loud, not violent, just wrong. Rowan Vale noticed it before he understood it, standing near the survey truck with Mara Keene, marking elevation notes along a stretch of road that had begun to soften under late morning sun. The air shifted direction without warning, dragging a colder current down from the tree line, the kind that didn't belong to the hour. Coda felt it too. The German shepherd lifted his head sharply, ears forward, body tightening in a way that wasn't fear, but readiness. His breath slowed. His gaze moved not toward Rowan, not toward Mara, but toward the road near Silas Wren's house. Rowan followed that look. There were already a few figures gathered there, too many for it to be routine. Something's off, Rowan said. Mara was already moving. Let's go. They reached the stretch within seconds, boots biting into snow that had begun to refreeze in thin, invisible layers. The light had shifted again, brighter, harsher, flattening depth perception in a way that made the road deceptively calm. A child lay near the edge of the path. Eli Mercer. He wasn't moving. His bicycle lay twisted beside him, one wheel still spinning lazily, catching light in a slow, indifferent rhythm. The front fork had bent slightly where it had struck something hard ice beneath snow, most likely. June Mercer was already there, kneeling beside him, her broad frame hunched protectively over the boy. Her hands moved with surprising steadiness, despite the panic in her eyes. "Eli. Hey, Eli, stay with me," she was saying, her voice low but urgent. "Don't try to sit up, sweetheart." Darren Pike stood a few feet away, frozen in place, his large hands hanging uselessly at his sides as if they had forgotten what to do. His face had lost its usual hardness, replaced by something raw and unguarded fear stripped of pride. Rowan dropped to one knee beside June. "What happened?" he asked. "Slipped," she said quickly. "Came down the path too fast. Hit the edge. He twisted. Then he just—" Her voice caught. Rowan's eyes moved fast. Breathing shallow. Rapid. Leg wrong angle at the lower shin. No visible bleeding. Conscious, but barely. "Eli," Rowan said, steady, calm. "Can you hear me?" The boy's eyelids fluttered. A faint sound. "Good." "Don't move," Rowan continued. "You're okay. Just stay still." Coda was already there. He didn't crowd the boy. He didn't bark. He positioned himself just beyond Eli's shoulder, body angled slightly outward, creating space, shielding without touching. His presence lowered the chaos in the air without needing to announce itself. Mara crouched on the opposite side, already pulling her gloves tighter. "Probable fracture," she said. "Lower leg. We need to stabilize before transport." Rowan nodded once. "Darren?" he said without looking up. "Truck, call it in. Nearest response." Darren blinked as if surfacing from underwater. Yeah, I—" He turned and ran, boots slipping once before catching. June's hands hovered over Eli's coat. "He's so cold," she whispered. "He will be," Rowan said. "We fixed that." And then, a shadow moved across them. Silas Wren. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He arrived. There was a difference. He carried a folded blanket under one arm and a small metal box in his other hand. His face showed nothing. No panic, no urgency, but his movements were precise, immediate, and entirely focused. "Don't lift him," he said. Rowan looked up. Silas met his eyes. In that moment, there was no distance between them. No past. No misunderstanding. Just alignment. "I wasn't going to," Rowan replied. Silas nodded once. He knelt beside Eli, setting the blanket down with care, then opening the metal box. Inside, bandages, a simple splint, cloth strips, and a small bottle of antiseptic, nothing modern, nothing elaborate, just what was needed. "What hurts?" Silas asked. Eli tried to answer but winced instead. "Don't talk," Silas said. "Just blink." He touched the boy's leg lightly, not testing reading. Eli flinched hard. "All right," Silas said. "We know." His hands moved with quiet authority, aligning the leg just enough to prevent further damage, securing the makeshift splint with practiced efficiency. Not rushed, not hesitant. Rowan watched. There it was again. That competence, not learned recently, earned long ago. Coda shifted slightly closer, lowering his body further into the snow, his presence anchoring the space around Eli like something older than training. As Silas finished binding the leg, Eli's hand, small, trembling, reached blindly outward. It didn't reach for June. It didn't reach for Rowan. It found Silas. Fingers clutching the worn sleeve of his jacket. Tight. Instinctive. Silas froze. Not in hesitation. In recognition. And for a single second, something broke through the lines of his face. Not softness, not weakness, Memory. Raw and unguarded. Then it was gone, but Rowan had seen it. And something inside him shifted with it. "Easy now," Silas murmured, his voice lower than before. "You're all right." The words were simple, but they landed differently coming from him. June wiped her eyes quickly, trying to regain composure. "Ambulance is coming," Mara said, checking her watch. 5 minutes out, maybe less. Darren returned, breath heavy, face flushed. "They're on their way," he said. His eyes moved to Silas. Something changed there. Not trust, not yet. But not resistance either. Silas stood slowly, brushing snow from his knees. "Don't move him again until they get here," he said. Rowan rose with him. "You've done this before," Rowan said. Silas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence carried enough truth. The ambulance arrived faster than expected, and its tires crunching hard against the frozen surface, red lights cutting through the pale daylight. 2 paramedics stepped out, one younger, mid-20s, quick in movement and sharp in voice. The other older, late 40s, steady and deliberate, with a beard threaded with gray and eyes that had seen enough emergencies to stop reacting to panic. The older one nodded toward Silas's work. "Good stabilization," he said. Silas shrugged. Held it still. They transferred Eli carefully onto the stretcher. The boy's grip on Silas's sleeve loosened only when June took his hand instead. "I'll ride with him," she said, climbing into the back. Darren stood beside the open ambulance door. "Tell his parents he started, then stopped. Didn't finish. Didn't need to. The doors closed. The vehicle pulled away. And just like that, the moment was over. Silence returned to the road. But it wasn't the same silence. It held weight now. Witness. Rowan looked around. At the same people who had spoken casually before, who had carried opinions like habits, stood differently now. Not changed completely, but cracked. June's voice lingered in the air. Darren's unfinished sentence. Eli's hand gripping Silas. Silas, standing there, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if this was just another thing done because it needed doing. Rowan stepped closer to him. "You were ready," he said. Silas looked toward the empty road where the ambulance had disappeared. "Road like this," he said quietly. "You learn to be." Rowan followed his gaze, and understood. Not fully, but enough. Coda moved to Silas's side. Not close, not touching, just there. Silas glanced down at him. "You again," he muttered. But there was no edge in it. The wind shifted once more, gentler this time. The kind that belonged. And for the first time since Rowan had arrived in Bright Hollow, the place felt different. Not safer, but clearer. Like something long buried under snow had finally been seen. The road did not change overnight. But the way people stood on it did. The morning after Eli Mercer was taken to the clinic, Bright Hollow carried a different kind of quiet. Not the old, practiced silence that kept things buried, but something more uncertain. A silence that listened back. Rowan Vale noticed it immediately. Men who would normally lean against trucks now stood a little straighter. Conversations paused not because someone had nothing to say, but because they were choosing what not to repeat. Even the wind seemed less eager to fill the gaps between people. Coda walked at Rowan's side, steady as always, but there was a new looseness in his posture. Not relief, not satisfaction. Recognition. Something had shifted. Rowan found Mara Keene near the edge of the mapped zone, kneeling beside a flagged marker, reviewing elevation data. Well, she didn't look up right away, but she knew he was there. "Kid's stable," she said. Rowan nodded once, Legs broken clean. No complications. Good. She tapped the marker into the snow a little deeper, then stood, brushing off her gloves. You feel it? She asked. Rowan glanced toward the road leading past Silas's house. Yeah. Mara followed his gaze. Places don't change, she said. People do. Rowan considered that, then shook his head slightly. Not exactly. Mara raised an eyebrow. Sometimes, Rowan said, people stop pretending they haven't changed. That earned him a quiet look of agreement. They walked toward the center of town, not in a hurry, but with purpose. June Mercer stood outside her store again, this time without the weight of crates in her arms. She had a broom in hand, pushing away thin layers of snow that had gathered overnight. The motion was steady, rhythmic, more habit than necessity. When she saw Rowan, she paused. He's all right, she said before he could ask. Doctor says he'll be walking again before spring turns. Rowan inclined his head. That's good. June leaned the broom against the wall and crossed her arms. Her expression held something different now. Not guarded, reflective. I've been thinking, she said. Rowan waited. That man out there, she continued, nodding faintly toward the road. He's been doing things like that for years. Rowan didn't respond. He let her finish. Fixing what doesn't belong to him, making things easier for people who never asked. Her jaw tightened slightly, and we let it turn into something else. There it was. Not confession, but the edge of it. Why? Rowan asked quietly. June gave a small, humorless breath. Because people remember what hurts louder than what helps. She looked past him now, as if speaking to the village more than to him. Years ago, there was an accident out on that stretch. Bad one. Winter like this. Our ice nobody saw until it was too late. Rowan didn't interrupt. Silas had warned about it, she said. Told folks that section was dangerous. Offered to help reroute, fix things up. But people don't like being told what they don't want to hear. Her eyes softened. After it happened, someone needed to be wrong. Rowan understood that too well. And he was the closest thing to it, June finished. Silence settled between them again. But this time it wasn't empty. They didn't need to look for Darren Pike. He found them. He stood near the edge of the road, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, shoulders squared like a man bracing against something that hadn't hit yet, but might. Up close, the wear in him was clearer. Not just age, not just labor. Loss. It sat behind his eyes like something unfinished. You talked to June, he said. Rowan nodded. Darren exhaled through his nose. She tell you the version that makes him look clean? She told me what happened. Darren looked down at the road. My brother was in that truck, he said. There it was. Not rumor, not distance. Truth. He didn't die, Darren continued. But he never worked the same again. Leg never healed right. Everything after that went sideways. His jaw flexed. And all anyone remembered was that Silas had worked on that truck the week before. Rowan watched him carefully. And that was enough? He asked. Darren gave a sharp, bitter half-laugh. It always is. The wind shifted again, but this time no one reacted to it. Truth is, Darren said, quieter now, I don't know if it was his fault. Never did. He looked up, but I knew who to look at. Rowan nodded slowly. That's easier. Darren didn't argue, because it was. Coda moved, not abruptly, not urgently, but with intent. He stepped away from Rowan and walked toward Darren. The larger man stiffened slightly, not out of fear, but out of unfamiliarity. Dogs didn't usually approach him without reason, yet Coda stopped just short of him, then sat, Still, looking up. Not submissive, not challenging. Present. Darren frowned. What's he doing? Rowan didn't answer, because he had seen this before. Coda did not offer trust. He reflected it. Darren hesitated, then awkwardly, uncertainly lowered one hand. Not to pet, just to exist closer. Coda didn't move, didn't lean in, didn't withdraw. He simply stayed. And in that stillness, something in Darren cracked, not open, not fully, but enough to let something older than anger breathe. Darren pulled his hand back slowly. "You always do that?" he asked. "Only when it matters," Rowan said. They walked the road together after that, not as friends, but not as strangers either. When they reached the bend near Silas's house, Rowan saw it immediately. Changes, small ones, subtle, but real. Someone had added fresh gravel to the edge of the path. The bench had been wiped clean of snow. The handrail showed new reinforcement at one joint. And near the garage. The door was open. Silas stood inside, back turned, working on something unseen. He didn't look up when they approached, didn't acknowledge them at all. But he didn't close the door either. That, Rowan understood, was the closest thing to invitation the man knew how to give. Mara joined them shortly after, carrying updated notes. "I've run the numbers," she said. "If we adjust the route by 6 feet east and reinforce the shoulder here, we can make this a permanent stop without compromising the structure of the road." Darren glanced at her. "You're serious?" "I don't do this for fun," Mara replied. He looked at the bench, at the path, at the house, then at Rowan. "You think he'll agree to that?" Rowan watched Silas in the doorway. The man hadn't turned, hadn't spoken. But he was listening. Rowan could feel it. "He doesn't have to agree to everything," Rowan said. "Just enough." Mara tilted her head slightly. "And if he doesn't?" Rowan exhaled. "Then we build around him, or not over him." That landed, not just with Mara, with Darren too. Silas finally spoke, without turning. "You talk a lot for someone who just got here." Rowan almost smiled. "Only when it matters." Silas grunted, then went back to his work. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched longer. But the road no longer felt like a place waiting for something bad to happen. It felt like a place deciding what it would become next. And for the first time since Rowan had stepped off that bus, he understood something clearly. This wasn't about fixing a road. It was about correcting what people had chosen to see. The first bus arrived without ceremony. No ribbon, no speech, no announcement carried on wind or radio, just the sound of an engine rolling steadily over ground that no longer betrayed it. Rowan Vale stood a few yards off the roadside, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn combat pants, shoulders relaxed in a way that hadn't come easily to him in years. Beside him, Coda sat with the composed patience of something that had already understood the outcome long before the pieces finished moving. Bright Hollow had gathered not as a crowd, but as a habit shifting into something new. June Mercer stood near the bench, her cardigan pulled tight against the morning cold, her stance rooted and solid as always. There was less hesitation in her now. Less watching. More belonging. Darren Pike leaned against his truck, arms crossed, her posture still guarded but not closed. The tension in his jaw remained, but it no longer directed itself outward like a weapon. It held inward now, like something being worked through rather than projected. Mara Keene stood near the marked edge of the road, clipboard in hand, scanning the final adjustments that had been made over the last week. She had ensured the grade held, the drainage cut properly, the shoulder reinforced where it mattered. Her work did not seek praise. It sought function. And today, function had held. The bus slowed as it approached. Not abruptly, not uncertainly. Smooth, controlled, as if the road had finally decided to keep its promise. It came to a stop directly in front of the place that had never been called a stop before. The bench, the windbreak, the path. Silas Wren's house. Silas stood on the porch. He hadn't moved since before the bus came into view. He stood with the same posture he carried everywhere, upright, still, hands at his sides or resting lightly against the frame of the door. His ash-gray work jacket hung loosely from his shoulders, worn at the cuffs, faded along the seams. His hair caught the morning light in thin silver lines, and his face, lined and unyielding, gave nothing away at first glance. But Rowan had learned where to look. It wasn't in the expression. It was in the stillness. Silas was not indifferent. He was watching, carefully, like a man who had learned that hope was something you approached with caution. The bus door opened with a soft, mechanical sigh. A young driver stepped down new to this route, unfamiliar with its history. He was in his early 20s, tall but not yet filled out, with sandy blonde hair tucked under a knit cap and a face still unmarked by the kind of winters that shaped men here. His movements were careful, respectful of a place he did not yet understand. Morning, he said to no one in particular. June nodded. Morning, she replied, voice steady. The driver glanced around, taking in the scene, then looked at the ground beneath his boots. Good stop, he said. Simple, but accurate. Passengers stepped down one by one. A woman with a bundled child, an older man gripping the railing with both hands, two school-aged kids with backpacks slung unevenly over their shoulders. They moved through the space naturally, without instruction, as if they had always known where to stand even though they hadn't. The bench filled. The handrail was used. The windbreak caught the edge of the cold. Function. Exactly as intended. Rowan shifted his weight slightly, watching. Not the bus. Not the people. Silas. The old man had not stepped forward. Not yet. But his gaze followed each movement, each person, each interaction with the space he had built long before it was recognized. Coda rose quietly, and he walked forward, not toward Rowan, not toward the crowd, toward the porch. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and sat, again, still, watching Silas. For a long second, nothing happened. Then, Silas stepped forward, not quickly, not dramatically, just one step, then another. He descended the porch with the same measured control he applied to everything, boots touching each step with quiet certainty. A woman near the bus struggled slightly as she adjusted the weight of a child in her arms. The child squirmed, the cold biting sharper than expected. Silas reached her without hesitation. Careful, he said, voice low, steady. He took the child, not asking, not forcing, just supporting the weight long enough for the woman to reposition her grip. The movement was small, unremarkable. Except it wasn't, because this time, no one looked away. No one pretended not to see. The woman nodded quickly. Thank you, she said. Silas gave a short grunt, dismissive, but not cold. He stepped back, returning to his place near the porch, not retreating. Not hiding. Simply resetting. Darren watched the exchange from beside his truck. Rowan saw the moment it landed. Not as a revelation. As confirmation. Darren pushed himself off the truck and walked forward slowly, stopping near the bench. He reached into the bed of his truck and pulled out a small wooden board, fresh, unweathered. He set it down near the edge of the path. "Figured this could help with runoff," he said, not looking directly at Silas. Silas glanced at the board, then at Darren. No words passed between them. None were needed. Mara approached Rowan. "That's it," she said quietly. "It's holding." Rowan nodded. "Yeah." But his attention stayed fixed on the space in front of the house, because it wasn't just holding. It was working. Eli Mercer arrived a few minutes later, limping slightly but upright, his leg supported by a temporary brace beneath his pant leg. His coat hung loosely around his small frame, and his backpack, recently repaired, sat properly balanced across both shoulders. He approached carefully, not rushing. When he reached the bench, he sat, exhaled, then looked toward Silas. "Hi," he said. Simple, unforced. Silas nodded once. "You're walking," he said. Eli smiled. "Doctor says I'll be running again soon." "Don't rush it." "I won't." They fell into a quiet that didn't need filling. Coda moved closer, lying down near Eli's boots, watching the road with calm attention. The boy rested one gloved hand on the dog's neck. Trust, given freely. Rowan stepped back, further from the center now. Not leaving, just repositioning. He had come to Bright Hollow to study a road, to measure slope, to calculate risk, to fix access. But standing there now, watching the bus come and go, watching people use what had once been ignored, he understood something that no map had shown him. This place had never needed to be taught how to care for its people. It had needed to remember. Silas turned slightly, looking out over the road as the bus pulled away. The engine noise faded, the light shifted, and for the first time, the space in front of his house did not feel like an extension of isolation. It felt like connection. He didn't smile. He didn't step forward again. But he didn't go back inside either. He stayed. And sometimes, Rowan thought, staying was the hardest part. The sign went up later that afternoon. Simple. Wooden. Hand-painted. Wren. Stop. No ceremony. No declaration. Just a name where one had never been allowed before. Silas stood beneath it, looking up. Not long, not dramatically, but long enough for it to matter. Rowan approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "You built it before anyone else saw it," Rowan said. Silas didn't look at him. "Didn't build it for them to see," he replied. Rowan nodded. "I know." Silas finally turned. His eyes held something different now. Not openness, not quite, but less resistance, less distance. "Road's better," he said. "It is." Silas looked past him, toward the horizon, then back. "You didn't force it." "No." Silas nodded once. "That matters." Rowan let that settle, then said quietly, "So did what you did." Silas didn't answer, but he didn't dismiss it either. The day moved on. People came and went. The bench filled and emptied. The wind shifted, softened, returned. And the road held. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder or light from the sky. They come quietly, wearing the hands of ordinary people. A man who fixes what is broken without asking for thanks. A child who remembers kindness. A dog who trusts what is good before the world learns to see it. Maybe God does not always change the world in one moment. Maybe He places small acts of goodness along our path, waiting for us to notice, to believe, and to continue them. In our everyday lives, we pass by more chances to do good than we realize. a word, a gesture, a moment of patience. These may seem small, but in the eyes of God, nothing given with a sincere heart is ever small. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if you believe in stories that heal, subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing more of them to you. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and place light in your path even in the coldest seasons of your life.